10 people walk into a room on the first day of the year. By the end of that year, 2 of them will be told they are exceptional, 7 will be told they met expectations, 1 will be told they failed. The outcome was decided before anyone started working. Not who, how many. The number of people permitted to succeed was set in advance. So was the number required to fail. This wasn't a game. It was Microsoft's performance review system. You have probably never worked at Microsoft. Stay anyway. Because what happened inside that company over the following decade isn't really a story about software, or even about one company's bad idea. It's a story about what happens to people the moment you decide how to measure them, and why the system that reshaped Microsoft eventually reshaped workplaces all over the world. The most uncomfortable part is that almost nobody involved believed they were doing anything wrong. Every organization above a certain size runs into the same wall. Once there are more people than any one person can watch, the company loses the ability to see its own work. It has to replace knowing with measuring. And so it builds an instrument, a rating, a scorecard, a review. And it points that instrument at its own employees, and it treats whatever comes back as the truth. Here's the thing about that instrument, and it's the idea this entire film rests on. A measurement is never only a description, it's an instruction. The moment people learn what's being counted, they begin, often without deciding to become the kind of person who scores well on it. Not through cynicism, through attention. You cannot watch a number about yourself and remain unchanged by it. Economists have a name for the failure mode. Goodhart's law: when a measure becomes a target, it stops being a good measure. Every company on Earth is quietly running this experiment right now. Almost none of them publish the results. Microsoft is where we can watch it happen, in detail at enormous scale, with the people who lived it on the record. So, what were they measuring? In the 1980s, Jack Welch ran General Electric and became, for a while, the most admired manager alive. His method was called the Vitality Curve. Rank everyone. Top 20%, reward. The middle 70, keep. The bottom 10%, remove. Every year, it spread across corporate America. And I want to defend it for a moment, because if you can't explain why intelligent people adopted this, you can't understand why it keeps coming back. Left alone, performance reviews rot in a specific and predictable direction. Managers inflate them, not out of dishonesty, out of ordinary human reluctance. Telling someone to their face that they are the weakest person on the team is genuinely hard, and doing it costs the manager something every time. So the ratings drift upward until nearly everyone is above average. The review means nothing, and the company is flying blind. The forced curve is a solution to that problem, a real one. Which gives us the first uncomfortable idea in this story. The curve was not invented to punish employees. It was invented because managers wouldn't do the hard part. So the company automated it. And that's what makes systems like this so hard to argue with in the room where they get approved. It doesn't arrive looking like cruelty. It arrives looking like fairness with the sentiment taken out. By the time it reached Microsoft, it had a plainer name: stack ranking. Here is the mechanic, exactly. Every unit had to declare a fixed percentage of its people as top performers. A fixed percentage as good, a fixed percentage as average, and a fixed percentage as poor. Not up to, not if warranted, fixed. Which means the curve never went looking for a bottom 10%. It manufactured one. And there's a deeper problem with the shape itself, one that took 30 years and 600,000 people to prove. The bell curve assumes human performance is normally distributed. Most people clustered in the middle, a few stars, a few stragglers, symmetrical on both sides. It's such a familiar picture that almost nobody checks it. In 2012, 2 researchers did. They analyzed 198 samples covering more than 630,000 people. Researchers, athletes, entertainers, politicians. And performance did not follow a bell curve. It followed a power law. A small number of people produce a wildly disproportionate share of the output, and the distribution has a long, thin tail, rather than a tidy, symmetrical middle. Now hold that against a system that requires exactly 20% to be excellent, and exactly 10% to be failing. If the underlying reality is a power law, then the curve isn't slightly imprecise, it's the wrong shape. It compresses the genuine outliers into a band with people producing a fraction of their output. And it invents a bottom group that may not exist at all. I'll be careful here. That research looked at academics and athletes, not office workers, and applying it wholesale to every job is a stretch. But it punctures the assumption underneath every forced curve ever drawn, and nobody at the time was checking the assumption. They were checking the percentages. And buried inside that design is the hinge this whole story turns on. It is a small technical detail with enormous consequences, and it is worth saying slowly. Your rating was not a measurement of your work. It was a measurement of your work, relative to the people sitting next to you. Follow that one step further, because a very strange conclusion falls out of it. If your score is relative, then your colleague's success is subtracted from yours. Every company says it wants collaboration. This one had, without ever saying so, made collaboration expensive, and people worked out the price. The most dangerous thing you could do at Microsoft was sit next to someone brilliant. That isn't a metaphor. In 2012, the journalist Kurt Eichenwald spent months interviewing current and former Microsoft employees. Executives told him, his words, that a lot of Microsoft superstars did everything they could to avoid working alongside other top-notch developers, out of fear that they would be hurt in the rankings. The best people in the company were arranging their careers around not working with the other best people in the company. Now consider what that actually cost, because it isn't the thing you'd put in a report. The damage wasn't the arguments or the bad reviews. The damage was the teams that never formed. The collaboration that would have been obvious in any other building and simply didn't happen. Products nobody can name because nobody built them, and it reached down into the ordinary hours of the day. If ratings are relative, then helping a colleague is expensive. Every hour you spend making someone else better raises the bar you are about to be measured against. So information stopped moving. People kept what they knew, not out of malice, out of arithmetic. And then it did something stranger, one level up. Think about the position a forced curve puts a manager in. To give somebody on your team a top rating, you need somebody else on your team at the bottom. The bottom slot isn't a punishment you hand out. It's a cost you have to pay to reward anyone, which quietly turns a weak performer into an asset, not a problem to fix, a slot to fill. And in forced ranking systems generally, managers have described doing exactly what that logic implies, keeping people they'd otherwise move on, and in some accounts, hiring with the bottom slot already in mind. A system built to remove the weakest people had created a reason to go and find some. I want to be precise here, because this is the heart of it. These were not bad people. Not one of them woke up wanting to damage Microsoft. They were doing exactly what the system asked. The system said your standing is relative, and they answered it correctly. They weren't sabotaging the company, they were surviving it. You don't need to have worked there for this to sound familiar. Once you know what an organization is counting, most of what people do inside it stops being surprising. It becomes predictable. Eichenwald asked one of them, an engineer named Brian Cody, whether his reviews were ever really about the quality of his engineering. Cody's answer, it was always much less about how I could become a better engineer, and much more about my need to improve my visibility among other managers. And notice the timing in what he's describing, because this is the part almost everyone gets wrong about performance reviews. The review happened once a year. The incentive ran every day. Every cycle, someone had to take the bottom mark, usually not fired, just marked, written down in a document they would never read in full by people who had never watched them work, still showing up, already gone. After all those interviews, Eichenwald wrote the single most damning sentence ever published about a performance review system. Every current and former Microsoft employee he interviewed, everyone, cited stack ranking as the most destructive process inside of Microsoft. Everyone. And one line from that reporting explains the decade that followed. It led to employees focusing on competing with each other, rather than competing with other companies, which is what a relative ranking does in the end. It doesn't just measure the competition, it relocates it out of the market and into the building. But to see how a number on a form turns into a career, you have to follow it into the room where it gets decided. Almost nobody who works in a large company has ever been in that room. Once or twice a year, in most large organizations, a group of managers sits down with a list of names. It's usually called calibration or a talent review. It is not a secret. It is standard, ordinary, defensible practice. If your employer has ever used that word, you have met a direct descendant of the system in this film. There are always fewer good ratings available than there are people who earned one. So the managers argue, and here is the economics of that argument. Your entire year, every late night, every disaster you quietly prevented, everything nobody saw, is compressed into roughly 2 sentences said about you by one person to a room of people who have never watched you work. Your manager is not your boss in that room. Your manager is your lawyer, and they are paying for your defense out of their own credibility, which is finite and which they may need next quarter for something else. Every rating you have ever received was decided in a conversation you were not invited to. None of this is corruption. That's what makes it durable. It is a reasonable process, staffed by reasonable people, doing the best they can with almost no information. And it produces a result that has been studied, outside Microsoft, across hundreds of companies. What it found is stranger than anything in this story so far. Because Microsoft was not the only company running this experiment, and it was not the worst outcome. In 1997, a company in Houston adopted its own version of Welch's curve. Employees ranked into the top 20%, the middle 70%, and a bottom 10% who were given a short window to improve or removed. Eventually, it covered all 18,000 people in the company. The employees gave it the name that stuck to the whole practice: Rank and Yank. Now watch what the same machine produces in a different building. At Microsoft, the safest way to protect your rank was to hoard what you knew. At Enron, the safest way to protect your rank was to make sure the numbers looked right, and to make sure bad news never reached anyone who could hold it against you. The system didn't produce a specific behavior. It produced whatever behavior protected your position. Point it at a software company, and you get information hoarding and a lost decade. Point it at a company whose product is a number on a page, and you get one of the largest accounting frauds in history. Same instrument, same logic, different consequences, because the thing people needed to hide was different. And that's the part I'd sit with. A ranking system doesn't have a personality. It doesn't push people toward dishonesty or toward secrecy. It pushes them toward whatever the local definition of safety happens to be. You don't get to choose which one you get. Meanwhile, outside the building, the world moved. In April 2007, Microsoft's chief executive was asked about a product Apple had just announced. He said, "There's no chance that the iPhone is going to get any significant market share." It's easy to laugh at that now. I'd rather ask the harder question. He was not the only person in that building with an opinion about the iPhone. Thousands of engineers had one. Some of them were certainly right. So inside a company where your rating depended on your visibility to the managers above you, who exactly was incentivized to walk upstairs and tell the chief executive he was wrong? This is the cost nobody puts in the business case. A company that rewards visibility will reliably get visibility. It does not necessarily get information. And a large organization that cannot move bad news upward is not badly managed. It's blind in a specific and expensive way. 2007, Apple releases the iPhone. Google takes search permanently. 2008, Android. 2010. The iPad creates an entire category of computer, and Microsoft, a company that had been building tablets since before most people had broadband, watches it happen. They'd had their own answer, a dual-screen device called Courier, in development from 2008, cancelled in 2010, and the market delivered its verdict slowly across 13 years. $1,000 invested in Microsoft in January 2000, every dividend reinvested, was worth about $767 by 2013. The same $1,000 in Apple, $20,120. Company value fell from roughly $510 billion to about $249 billion. They called it the lost decade. So here's the turn, and it isn't the one you expect. The system did not fail. It was asked to produce a ranking. It produced a ranking. It was asked to identify a bottom 10%, and it identified one every time, on schedule, exactly as specified. It never once malfunctioned. The tragedy isn't that anybody broke the rules, it's that they followed them. There is no villain in this story. There's no memo where someone chooses to hollow out the company. There's a spreadsheet with percentages in it and thousands of intelligent people correctly optimizing for the thing they were told to optimize for. Nobody did anything wrong. That's the part that should worry you. Now, the honest version of this story has another side, and I owe it to you. Steve Ballmer rejected the idea that Microsoft had a lost decade at all, and he has an argument. Across those same years, revenue and profits grew. A serious case can be made that the flat stock was mostly the heir leaving an absurd 1999 valuation, not a company failing. And the claim that stack ranking caused the lost decade is Eichenwald's thesis. It's a thesis, argued from testimony. It is not a proof, and I'm not going to sell it to you as one. But this much is not in dispute. Every person he asked, inside that company, named the same process. Not the strategy, not the competition, not the market. The way they were graded. On the 12th of November 2013, Microsoft's head of HR, Lisa Brummel, sent an email to every employee in the company. 4 words in it mattered. No more curve. No predetermined distribution, no fixed share of failures, gone after roughly a decade. 3 weeks later, Microsoft's stock closed at $38.94, its highest in 13 years and 4 months. For the first time since this story began, the company was worth what it had been in 2000. 2 months after that, a new chief executive took over. Satya Nadella inherited a company worth about $300 billion. 10 years later, it was worth $3 trillion. The cloud did that, Azure did that, a total change of strategy did that. Ending a performance review system did not make Microsoft the most valuable company on earth, and I won't pretend otherwise. But it's worth noticing what the new leadership rebuilt almost immediately, and what they chose to start measuring. Whether you had contributed to someone else's success, the exact behavior the old system had made irrational. So why does this keep happening? Because the benefits of ranking people are visible: a clean distribution, a defensible document, a number for the board. And the costs are invisible. You cannot put the team that never formed into a spreadsheet. You cannot measure the product nobody built. Every system with visible benefits and invisible costs survives far longer than it deserves to. The machine was never cruel. It didn't hate anyone. It didn't know anyone's name. It just optimized, and what it optimized for was never quite the thing the company actually needed. Microsoft killed the curve in 2013, and the business world treated it as a lesson learned. Here's how long that lesson lasted. In the same week that Microsoft announced it was abandoning stack ranking, another major technology company was in the press for expanding its own version of it, reporting that November described Yahoo rolling out a quarterly review process that required managers to place a share of their people in the lower categories, under a different name, with the same mechanic. The most public failure of a management system in modern corporate history. And the lesson did not survive 7 days. Roughly a decade later, it's back. Reporting over the last few years describes major technology companies, Amazon, TikTok, and Meta among them, tightening systems that compare employees against each other and expect a share of them to come out at the bottom. Nobody calls it a curve anymore. The name's changed, the shape didn't. So this was never really a story about Microsoft. Somewhere right now, a manager is being told the numbers have to fit. And the last thing worth asking is about your own review, whatever your company calls it. Is anyone measuring you? Or are they measuring where you happen to be standing, relative to the person beside you? Because those are not the same question, and only one of them has anything to do with how good you are. If you've ever sat in a review that didn't seem to be about your work, subscribe. There are more of these.